I'll bring up our slides, and then we went through and tested them. So let me go back to the beginning here. So we're happy to be here with you today to talk about the Public Library Compensation and Staffing Survey. And as we get started, we, of course, wanted to introduce ourselves. I'll start, and then I'll hand it over to you, Judah.
Sure.
My name is Stephanie Chase, and I'm the founding principal of Constructive Disruption. And I think what's great to note, some of you in the audience may remember Judah and I are former members of the Vermont library community, but we have been continuous members of library work. Both of us have been working in libraries for about 25 years. Judah more. I'm currently the executive director for the Libraries of Eastern Oregon, which is a resource sharing cooperative that covers about half of the state of Oregon, so about 55,000 miles. I serve some counties that are the size of Vermont and have one library, so it's very interesting. And I also serve on the American Library Association Executive Board.
My name's Judah Hamer. It's great to meet everyone here, and thanks for coming. I'm a lead consultant working pretty hand in glove with Stephanie for Constructive Disruption, and I also do work for Banduho Advertising and Design. It's a family business, and when I said I would take a break from libraries, which I've never really done, I started helping with operations and HR, and have been always surprised that there's such an intersection with public messaging and what we understand about users. And so I'm bringing my background in that piece of recruitment and retention and so forth to this project. Stephanie put on the slide, I'm the former president of the Vermont Library Association. I kind of forgot about that little bit. I remember the projects we do, like when we went to a blog-based website, and Jessamine West and I built that. It feels like a lifetime ago. I was much younger. And so I'm thrilled to be back. When I lived in Vermont, I was in Cornwall, and I have great affection for my experiences working in Rutland and Middlebury and Shelburne. Really pleased to be here.
Yeah, I worked in Westford. It was my very first library director job in Westford, Vermont. I was a school librarian in Fletcher, and also was at the Stowe Free Library. And so for those of you, in case you're really wanting to know what our Vermont bona fides are too, and that we really understand where you're coming from, and we really brought that perspective to this project and the survey. Judah and I, along with our colleague Lucinda from Norwich, were the three founders of the Green Mountain Library Consortium. So we understand, and as Judah said, as we were coming in, we miss the state. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to cover in our session today. So many of you may already know this, but we want to just give a brief overview of what the working group on the status of libraries in Vermont is. So you know a little bit, or have a reminder about who's really pushing this survey forward and what the survey is part of. We'll give an overview of the staffing, compensation and staffing survey project itself. We'll review the survey and the supporting resources. So we want to make sure we give time to that today. We'll look at a PDF of the survey. We'll look at the questions. We'll look at the resources that are there for you as you work through answering it for your library. We have some tips for working through the survey efficiently. It is long, because we are asking for a lot of really important information. So we have some suggestions about how to maybe break up your time, how to approach it, so that you don't have to try to sit down. For many of us, it'll be difficult to sit down and do all at once. And then, of course, we want to save plenty of time for questions. And then, so for those of you who are watching this on a recording, at the end of our presentation, before we go into questions, there's the email addresses where you can contact me or you can contact Judah will be up on the screen. So as you have questions, there's a way for you to reach out and ask us those as well. So let's just touch on what the working group on the status of libraries in Vermont is. And so Judah, I know if you could grab the link for people in case they want to go to the website, we'll put that in the chat for people who can see it. But the working group was created in 2021 with the passage of an act that was really about education as a whole. And as part of the charge of the group, they're really responsible, this is a quote, for studying the statewide status of libraries and submitting a report of their studies to the House and Senate Committees on Education by the end of this year. So we're approaching the end of the working group's charge. And so this compensation and staffing survey is just one part of what the working group has been working on. And so, as I mentioned, Judah's putting the link in the chat. For those of you who are looking at the webinar, we'll make sure that you have a link to that as well. The website contains a list of the working group members. And what's really great is the recordings, agendas, and minutes of all of their meetings. So you can really look at the scope of what the working group has been studying over the past several years about the status of libraries in Vermont. And they're really, again, their charge was to really strengthen and support libraries of all sizes and improving library services to the public. So not a small feat. And as one part of that, there's the Public Library Compensation and Staffing Survey Project. So for all of us who have lived in Vermont, I think we know and worked in Vermont, our staffing and the compensation for our staff is one of the challenges that we really face in public libraries. And so this is part, again, of the overall report, the Compensation and Staffing Survey, to the legislature. So the legislature was interested in looking at the staffing levels and salaries of Vermont library workers. And that's in particular for public libraries, for municipal and incorporated public libraries. So not school libraries, not academic libraries, really looking at our public library colleagues. And the working group would like to have, it's really important to them that the results be statistically significant. So there's an aim for an 80% response rate. So that's something Judah and I will be working on, following up, supporting you, making sure that we can reach that rate. But something that we really ask each of you who are here today and each of you who are watching the recording is to really think about who you can reach out to make sure that they also complete this survey. It's going to be really important that we hear from libraries of all sizes, libraries across the state, again, so that the results that we get are really meaningful, really useful, really paint an accurate picture. And so the survey results, again, will be part of the overall report. And this is a quote, these are quotes directly from the working group's charge. So as part of the report, and what they asked for us to do and the survey to do was to study staffing levels at Vermont libraries, whether staffing levels are sufficient to meet community needs, whether library staff compensation and benefits are sufficient, how libraries rely on volunteers, and what resources are available for workforce development and the training of library staff. So you can see kind of a lot of different pieces. So as we go in and we look at the survey, and I'm gonna stop sharing my screen in just a moment so Judah can bring up his screen. We're gonna look at the survey itself. So when we do that, there are a couple of things that we want you to remember as we go in. So a couple little reminders. So each library will receive, and you may have already received, an email with a link to the survey. Certainly by the time you're watching this as a recording, you'll have that email with a link to the survey. What's important to remember is that each library should only fill out the survey once. So we recommend the library director be the point on that, but in your library, make sure you've decided who's answering the survey and that you only submit it once for your library. We're trying to give you as much time as possible, and we know that that's really critical at this moment as many of your colleagues are facing challenges from the flooding. So we have this survey open for about a month. We're asking for you to complete it by August 14th. And what is really important as you get started is that there'll be information that you really need to collect before you start to fill out the survey. We're using the NIC platform or NIC platform, I'm not sure how it's referred to, that you all should be familiar with. It's the survey platform that the state library uses. So you may remember, or you may have had the experience of, if you wait too long in a page of the survey, it's going to time yourself out. So you'll see as we go through some of our recommendations, they're really built on you printing out, having a print copy of that survey, or having your notes in writing, and filling out the survey online. So don't just find your information and enter it into the survey. Have it in the space before. Collect that information before. And again, we have some suggestions for how you can set aside time if you need some advice about how to break up approaching the project. And then what's handy is that when you're done, you'll get a copy of the completed survey after you send it. So after you fill it out and submit it, and Judah and I receive a copy, you will also receive a copy of what you put in. So I have a little screenshot here, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll have Judah bring up the survey. And let's just take a walk through what you're going to be asked to be filling out.
Hey everyone, just going to screen share that window. What I'm sharing with you is the PDF of the survey because I think that is the easiest way for you to plan looking at the survey ahead of time, just as Stephanie was mentioning, really to get ready before you log into that NIC platform. I remember doing the state annual report when I was in Vermont myself, and I just did it all by hand because we know how that platform is. It really just kicks you out at different times if you take too long. So here, just at the front end of the survey, I'm not going to reiterate all of this, kind of an introduction. This echoes what Stephanie told you about the survey and the working group in short form. And certainly you can see that information on the website. And then the survey has distinct sections. There's section A, B, C, and I'm going to go through those sections to give you a sense. Section A is information about your specific public library. And the thing that we're reassuring everyone about is that while we have this information so that we can track which libraries have provided what data, this is confidential, and this you are not identified in the survey in connection with any of the data. None of your employees are. It's all separated. What this Section A Public Library Overview does is help us see who's taken the survey, where we might have gaps in the Vermont library community, so that Stephanie and I can follow up and really try to get the greatest level of participation so we have good statewide representation in the data and the results. So here, Section A is pretty typical information about your library. I'm not sure many of you would need to prep ahead of this. You know, it's your name, your email address, your telephone number, whether your library is incorporated or municipal. And we ask the name of the municipality because we know in Vermont, our libraries are often named things that are not reflective of the town we're in. And then question 8, a heads up, we ask if your library is part of another larger governing organization. So some libraries are part of a school. I think South Burlington's an example of that. We have a handful of libraries that are part of a federated system. So this would be a question that applies to those libraries. Most libraries are no for this, but it may apply to you, and then we would follow up with some details. And so after that basic information about your library, we're asking for library open hours, days of the week, how many total hours you're open, whether you have some seasonal changes. It's kind of standard questions about public access. So this is information that we would like so that when we're looking at the data, we can see what correlations and patterns there are between staffing levels and the degree of access through library open hours the public has in a given community. Now, Section B, I'm going to suggest here that we take a second to look at Section B is staffing levels and compensation, and a preview for Section C is Section C focuses on benefits. So if you are preparing for this section, I think if I were doing the survey, I would get a staff list if I have a staff list, or an organizational chart. If you have a spreadsheet or a list of everyone in your organization, or sometimes you might have this in multiple spots. I understand, I've been there. Who's in the position, the number of people, educational requirements. If you look at this bulleted list on the screen share, having this information before you start to fill out this section of the survey will help you, I think, just methodically go through the survey and answer the questions. You'll need things like the average or typical hourly rate of pay, the average or typical number of years staff members have worked in this position. The reason we say average or typical is we know that in many libraries there can be outliers. So you can have somebody in a position who's been there for 30 years, and that person's level of benefit and compensation might be very distinct from people who are there under 10 years. So we're asking you to make the best decision you can If it makes sense to average some of these things, great. If it makes sense to say, well, this person in this position is an outlier, everyone else is kind of here, then to go with what looks typical, because what we're really trying to get here is what's representative of your library, and then in turn, what's representative of patterns across the state. And so the other thing we'll mention is not all fields are required in this section. So when we look down, you will have a series. Number one, the number one looks like every other number. So what we have here, number one, is we start with a position, library page or shelver, give you a description of this position. I've just highlighted it a little bit, kind of a ballpark of what this job usually looks like in a library. And then we ask you a pretty standard list of questions, educational requirements, the number of, there's a typo, the number of people in the position, the total number of hours worked weekly in the position, the average hourly rate, the average number of years in the position. If there are some extra duties that really are not well captured in our pretty general description, you can feel free to put that down there as well. And so this pattern, do you want to say something, Stephanie?
Well, as I say, we have a detailed guide to each of the questions. Yes. It's to each of the sections. So as you said, section A is pretty simple, but section B and C both have a detailed guide for if you might have some questions. And so I think one of the things that you had mentioned was about average and typical. We give some guidance there too. But with the education requirements, one of the things we point out is it's for the position. It's not for the staff person. So if you were saying, oh, I have, 3 people with 3 different degrees, we're not looking for that. We're looking for what's required. What would you put in a job listing, or what is in their job description?
Thanks. That's awesome. Thank you. And then I'm just going to shift down. If you look at number 1, there's a pretty standard pattern on this PDF. And number 2, you'll see it's kind of a template for, what are the requirements, what are the number of positions, what are the total number of hours worked weekly. We know that there's some variation, so we would just say, please do your best. Again, there's a job description. And if you go through section A, I think we might have 16 different positions here. Library page, library assistant, or clerk. And you'll see this pattern. I'm just going to skim down here so you can see library technical assistant or library technician. And we really try to make some distinctions here so you can make the best choice, because sometimes someone might fall in one or another category. For example, if your assistant director is the de facto children's librarian, but the title is assistant director, you could, in additional duties for the assistant director, right, this person provides all of the children's programming. If on the converse, you have a children's librarian who is the librarian in charge, or the acting director when the director is not in the building, you might put that in the additional notes. We know that there are these variations. We have lots of smaller staffs that flex in so many different ways in Vermont, and we know this. So we've provided descriptions for each of these positions. You'll see nothing really surprising, right? Children's librarian, teen librarian. We have a note for children's, by the way, that if the children's librarian does the teen services too, you can just fill out the children's or youth services position and note that, because there are far fewer distinct teen services librarian positions in the state than there are children's librarians that serve basically, ages 0 up to, high school and so forth, up to and including high school. Again, adult services librarian, supervising librarian. We have this as a position that's distinct from a head of circulation or an assistant director, which might have supervisory duties. We have two positions I'd note: a bookkeeper or a finance person. My experience in Vermont is there's all sorts of different setups in public libraries about how people might handle the work that's done here, because it is often not a full or half-time job. And so one of the different questions we have here is if this position is part of the municipal department in town, because that's that's a setup that we see. We have the same question for a custodian or maintenance person. If that person services your library and other town buildings and is part of a broader team, like Department of Public Works or something, you might note that because the survey data might be different as a result of that. And
Should
then
I
again,
just pop in about
absolutely.
the with the kind of the bookkeeper, finance person, and facilities or janitor custodial services? In the detailed guide, one of the things that we point out is to please not include those positions if they're independent contractors. So if, say, you are paying your bookkeeper or your janitor separately, right? They're aligned from, they provide an invoice to you and you pay them separately through the budget. We're not looking for you to include those independent contractor hours because that could vary so much. And then we had a couple of great questions here. So just, as we go in about if we don't have positions or if we're the only person in the library, how do you want us to answer those questions?
Presumably you are the library director then. And so I would focus on that library director and I would put additional notes in there. There'll be some data that shows in the end, if you list that's your only position, we will see. This is where I love that I understand Vermont, and Stephanie does too. We know what a one-person shop looks like. And I would encourage you to really make any additional notes so that it's very clear that I'm the one person who does absolutely everything, inclusive of custodial or finance, if that's included too. So we really have this picture of the libraries in I say our state, like I still live here, in Vermont, that really where you have one person who's doing absolutely everything, or maybe you're not doing facilities, like somebody comes in and cleans, but you're really responsible for everything else. And if somebody's coming and cleaning, I know you're responsible for that too, because things happen. So that's a great question. I think that's what that answer would look like. It would be most reflective of what your institution looks like. And that library directorship is big in terms of providing leadership to the community and all of the operational support. So I see a question, would you include the town's treasurer if they pay the library's bills? If that person is a paid employee of the town, I would put that under finance person. Check that box that says they're part of another municipal department. And if you want, because if you feel comfortable with that, just put in additional remarks like this is the town treasurer or this is the town bookkeeper. What if your children's librarian is funded by grants, not directly through the budget? This is a great question. If the children's librarian position is a staff line position where the person is an employee, they are not an independent contractor, so they're not paid the same way we might pay a performer or something like that, I would list that person as an employee. At the same time, I recognize the question because that position then has an unstable source of funding because grants come and go. Feel free to put in there, this is a grant funded position. I say oversharing is great because if we have kind of a question, sometimes simple phrases like that really provide us insight into what's going on, particularly if the data for that position for your library kind of is an outlier based on what else we're seeing. And then would you include the trustee treasurer who does the bookkeeping? No, actually would not. That person's not an employee. That person's a volunteer. There is, I'm still screen sharing. I'll scroll down. I was gonna mention a couple things about student workers. We have, I think it's the very last one, 16 is unpaid volunteer, student worker, or intern. And this would be a great place to put that you have someone who does something else for the library. I don't know if we have, I think it would be other here because I don't know that we have put in basically bookkeeping for the library, but that absolutely would be a slot that you could put it in. For us, it answers the question, how does that library get its bookkeeping done? And answers the bigger question for the state, what is the diversity of things that people do for libraries to sustain them that they do for free, unpaid labor that is not covered within a library's overall staffing budget. These are great questions. Let me just,
And I
Stephanie, am
think
I
that,
missing?
no, I think that answer is, it kind of gets at the real outlier, right? The real exception that we think this. We really ask with that question 16 to not list your trustees as volunteers. So the duties they're doing as trustees, even if even if you have a trustee who's coming in to shelve, for example, or who does programming for you, we're not asking you to include their hours. But I think this piece, if you have a trustee who is doing the bookkeeper, they're your bookkeeper, they're not getting paid for it. It's a representation of a set of hours that we'd like to capture somewhere. And so it feels like we could put it in one or the other, but making sure that that exception is captured somewhere is important. But overall, just recognizing we're not including the hours that in question 16 of the hours that your library board spends, your board of trustees spends doing their board work. And we're also not looking for you to tell us that they do shelving or, programming or desk hours or whatever they might do for you if that's the case.
Thanks. I'm skimming as I was listening to Stephanie, and Bree had asked earlier, if we do not have certain positions, do we leave it blank or fill in zeros? You can leave it blank. The reason none of these fields are required is because the NIC or the NIC platform, if you require things, you probably all seen this, then you just get all the long list of like things you've missed. And on a survey of this length, it's a real usability problem for you all. So you can just skip over the positions that really just don't apply and fill out the ones that apply and move on. So we designed it that way to try to make it the easiest at your end. So you're not checking boxes and filling out zeros and like for the sake of doing that. If you skip it, it'll just show up as a blank for the data profile for your library. And that's fine at our end because we'll know that you skipped it because the position doesn't apply. Somebody says we're staffed by volunteers on Saturdays. If we weren't, we'd only be open 12 hours a week. Wow, I know what this looks like on an operational level. That's challenging. I would put under unpaid that people are doing the desk and basically doing circulation. They might be doing shelving, whatever things people are doing on Saturdays. If people are basically focused on public service. I know when I've been staffed slim on Saturdays in Vermont, it's like let's just serve the public and we'll worry about everything else on Monday. That's great too. You could note that this would impact your hours, but that's not necessarily part of what we'll track formally because libraries have all sorts of funding structures that impact the number of hours they're open and closed. I remember when I worked in Rutland, there's several endowments and like four or five different municipalities that fund that library. And if one of those municipalities does not provide funding, it would certainly impact staffing and then hours. The children's, Melissa has the children's librarian position funded by grants. If they don't get that grant, that would possibly impact hours in a library too. So it's a pretty common assumption at our end that staffing is directly correlative to the number of hours that you're open. So we would look at your library and say, wow, they have all these volunteers. You could even know, hey, these are the people who staff us on Saturdays. It's kind of helpful insight that we can at least capture. But beyond that, we're looking at the connection of hours and staffing overall. So this is just one particular nuance. Thanks for asking these questions. It's great.
I think this is a great question too that points out how important it is to be prepared, right? To have all of your information at hand before you start to fill out the survey, because you can see you're being asked to put a lot of things in here. If you might have a number of volunteers who do a range of duties, and we're asking you for you to add that all together, right? What's the total number of those? What's the total number of hours they work? On average, in this case, on average, how long are they here? So we're asking for you to put quite a bit together in this one question.
Yeah, I think for me, any library I've worked in, just tracking the diversity of volunteer contributions is really its own little project. Particularly if you're thinking about people who might in the community provide free programming. to your library too, and that's a volunteer, that's a give. It's so important and so necessary.
Yeah, Bree asked a great question too about the number of volunteer positions. So because it can vary so much from regular volunteers who come in weekly to the folks who hang the screen door and help with occasional IT, how do we want them to capture that?
I would do what you think is typical. So if you have a book sale once a year and that brings in 15 people basically for that project, I don't think you have 15 volunteers throughout the year. What we're really trying to get a sense here is you have kind of this volunteer workforce, so to speak, that's really helping to sustain the day-to-day, week-to-week running and operating of the library, kind of outside of special events or one-offs, or like, you know, if you've got somebody in town who helps you fix things, because that's how we keep the library together. That was Cornwall, where I lived, and so that was just kind of normal. But that was really, really occasional, and it was often a personal favor. It was not necessarily someone officially volunteering to keep the library running. I'm really glad you asked that. Thanks so much. The other thing I wanted to mention as we go down this list, I'm trying to point out things where people might have a couple of questions just to anticipate. We have a couple of questions that give you an opportunity to talk about student workers. And by student worker, we mean a position that is, I'm trying to remember where this is, a position that is definitionally belonging
I think it's 13.
Oh, thank you. Belonging to a student. So we know that library shelvers and library pages are often students, but they can be adults too. And that's not definitionally a job. That's a student job. But if you've got a position that you look to fill with a student, for years, Middlebury staffed its service points and shelving, Ilsley Library in Middlebury, with Middlebury College student interns. They were definitionally, it was part of their work study packaging. And that was a critical part of how that library, you know, provided so many open hours to the public. And so this is that kind of position. You know, you might have a position that's reserved for high school students, and you just serially rotate somebody through, and that maybe that, you know, young person works a couple years, graduates, moves on, and so that position then goes on to another student. So that's how we're looking at that. It's you might have students in other positions too. I joke that I've been in libraries so long because I started shelving, doing custodial work and circ work at 16. It's just like, because I would do anything to avoid shelf reading or filing catalog cards. That's me. Who wants to do that? So, so we have all of these, and just as a note, because I skimmed over it, the volunteer list is really, really long of duties performed by volunteers, student worker, intern. We try to think of as many different checkboxes as we could, and then of course you can fill something in because we may not, and we also have kind of an open-ended box in a few spots of the survey where if you want to say something because you think, well, this is a little bit of kind of an unusual setup, or I'm filling this out because I just want you to have a flag and understand this data I'm giving you when I'm telling you. There's some opportunities to do that. So as much as a conversation you can have with us when you're filling out the survey, so that we can understand what you shared. So let's move on to benefits. I actually think for me, I would have an easier time with section B because it's pretty routine. Like once you get your list of employees, how many positions, what they make, like if you're part of budgeting or you get your hands on your budget because you do that as part of a team with trustees or other people in your municipality, like you've got some of that already because you have to do the annual budget and make as good a plans as you can. That's data that many of us have. I think sometimes our tracking in libraries of benefits is a little bit more nebulous. And so this is the section that I looked at when I first read the draft of the survey from the working group and thought, wow, I would want to make sure I have all this stuff lined up first. And so I have these, or we have these 6 bullets here to kind of cue you about some of the data that you'll need. And so it's health and dental benefits, leave or paid time off, however you call that, vacation, sick, and so forth. Retirement plans, I'll talk about that in a minute. Paid family leave, I'll make a couple of notes about that in a minute, along with short and long-term disability and unemployment insurance. So I think the one that applies in many different ways to lots of libraries is this question about employer paid health benefits. And so for a lot of these questions, we ask you basically, are staff eligible? Or how are they eligible? If you look at 1B, is it full-time, part-time? Are there specific positions like the director and the children's librarian get benefits? And kind of definitionally, these positions come with these health benefits. And then how many? Again, of course, we want numbers. And then we say the average percentage. If we look at 1E, again, it's average or typical. Sometimes you have someone who's been in an institution and maybe their benefits are getting fully paid and no one else has that. That's not average or typical. So maybe take that person out of the mix and look at the average or typical for the most number of people who are eligible for benefits. Part of it so that we have data that really resonates. Again, just like the wages, it's kind of, what does it look like overall? Not the odd situation. And then how many part-time staff or full-time staff are eligible. So again, and the average percentage for each. So if you look at 1D, 1E, 1F, 1G, we're asking you the same thing, but we're asking you to split it up for part-time and full-time people. And then we really have the same kind of question for dental benefits. It really echoes in the same way. Full and part-time, who's eligible, is it the position, and so forth. The questions really are the same, it's just dental instead of health benefits. And then we have a question about employer paid leave benefits. So we ask you if people are eligible for leave and how is their eligibility determined. You'll see this pattern over and over in this benefits section. This distinction between full-time and part-time employees or specific positions. And if it's a specific position, I know some libraries that are small, it's only the director who gets this because everyone else is part-time. And they may not really have the same level of benefit. And so that might be where you'd say a specific position. And then again, we have the question of how many full-time staff or how many part-time staff. This is really like the first and second question. The pattern's the same. And what I'm trying to point out is you need to know the same information for each of these questions, but for me, where this information might live for my library might be in different places. Like I might have health and dental in one file, and then I'm going to have my leave accruals and sheets and rates and all of that in another file, depending on the configuration of my library. If you have a library that has a union and you have a larger staff, because we do have, I know we have some folks in the room, so to speak, who have that, I would suggest taking the average or typical number, because often there's different rates of leave that are accrued over time. So we'd want to look at, kind of what's the most common thing somebody would see for somebody working full-time in your circulation department, even if you have 5 people working there full-time, kind of where does it land for most people? And then when we also look at, if you think back to section B, like, what's the average hourly rate of pay and the average length of time people are there? If we see that, wow, everybody in your circulation department gets 4 or 5 weeks of vacation. Oh yeah, many of them have been there 20 years. We can see this connection. We can look at these things together. So when we look at what the overall picture looks like, that might look distinct to your library, and it might look very different if you had 5 people who are there 1 or 2 years. So this is where having this data from both of these sections kind of be looked at for a representation of your library is really, really helpful. For employer paid retirement benefits, our first question is if your library participates in VEMRs. The reason we ask this is because VEMRs is a pretty standard system in Vermont, and if you participate in that, we actually don't need to ask you several other questions, because we as the public know how VEMRs works. We can go to the site, see what the employee contribution is. We don't have to ask you those questions. So we've tried to take a little bit off your plate with this. If your library is not part of VEMRs, and this I think is often the case for incorporated libraries in Vermont, you might then be answering questions like 4D, do you offer a 401k or a 403b? And what does this look like? So, so this section of retirement benefits looks different, I think, for people who are not in the municipal employee retirement system, and that's kind of how that parses out there in a big picture way. And of course, we have questions about full-time, part-time, specific positions, really trying to capture what's the pattern here for people who work in Vermont libraries. And then employer paid family leave. The distinction that we're making up here, I went to highlight and it didn't quite do it the way I wanted. Vermont, so I think many of you probably know already, people get unpaid family and parental leave. This is a right, a worker right in many states, is certainly a strong worker right in Vermont. But there are, in some places, paid family leave benefits. They're part of a condition of your employment. And so if you're the person filling out the survey, the question for you, the first step is to see if you even have that. So if you have your own employment policy at the library, it would be there. If you have a town employment policy that really applies to the library as well, as is often the case, I would look in that town employment policy to see what it says about that. Because if you don't, there's not really much else to say here. You would answer no, and you would move on to the next question. If there's a yes, we'd want to know again, who's really eligible and what does that eligibility look like and mean for somebody? This is the same situation for employer paid short-term disability benefits. Some places offer this, some places do not. It really varies widely by library. And I would say, I'm anticipating a question I didn't think of until right now, which is some places provide employees an opportunity to have a payroll deduction for something like AFLAC. That's not an employer paid short-term disability if the employee is paying it. Just means you're making it easy for that person to purchase that. And so that's not really a benefit. They're just accessing that disability insurance through, basically a sale that happened with you as the employer. It's not something the employer is really providing unless the employer is paying for it. See more.
There are a bunch of questions, and I wonder if you just want to, if we just want to go through the questions.
I saw a few pop up, but I'm looking at the share screen. I lose sight of the chat. So thanks. Yeah. So, I see it.
So the first one is back here. If we go way back to the beginning, this is a question about question 1E.
Awesome.
So if we go back to number 1.
What is the average percent of employer paid health benefits full-time staff receive? So I'm just going to use round numbers because it's easy for me. Hope it's easy for everybody. Say health benefits are $100 a month and the employer pays $80. The employer is paying 80% of that benefit. If the employer is paying the whole thing, the employer is paying 100%. So in these percentage questions for the benefits, that you'll see 1E, 2E is the same. 1G is the same for part-time staff, and you'll see the same thing for other benefits. It's if there's a shared cost, what's the breakdown? What percentage is the employee paying and what percentage is the employer paying? If you want to, Marie, go back and say, hey, that helped or didn't help, we'll track the comments because I'm certainly happy to circle back again. But it's really what's the cost and how is it divided on average? Because often when there are long tenured staff in libraries, my experience is that more of their benefits get paid for by the employer, and often in not only Vermont, many of our employment situations, newer employees pay more. And so we would say kind of what's average or typical, because if you have one outlier employee where it's paid 100%, but everybody else, you're paying half, I'd say half is really what is the accurate average, what's typical. And that's where really we want and encourage people to say, make your best decision here about what it would look like to work at your library and pay for benefits. So you just
I feel like a good guideline there would be, what would you do if you had to fill that position today?
Yeah.
right? So if my person who with a long tenure or under a different contract or whatever it might be, if I were to refill their position, if they were to retire or leave, what would I be giving that new position that's more typical or more average?
Yep. Absolutely.
And then we have another question. If the municipality offers a separate 401k but does not contribute, do you answer yes to that question? So that's in four where you are right now.
You can, if, let me read that again. So I make sure municipality offers a separate 401k but does not contribute. Do you answer yes? Yes, because it is a benefit to have an employer provide you access to pre-tax savings. They may not contribute, and that's fine. I think if we scroll down under, so that question is 4D, and you might actually answer, somebody's in VMers, but you might have VMers and a 403B program for employees as well. You could answer this yes if you want. Nothing's going to stop you from answering yes to VMers and yes to this. And then you would, excuse me, under 4F and 4G, what percentage of retirement benefits for full-time staff or part-time staff are paid by the employer? You can put a 0 there if they're not putting anything in, but you're allowing the employee to do that. You could just say we don't contribute, but we do have a sense that this is something that employees have access to through their municipality. Our town uses short-term disability as family leave. So I would answer under family leave. This is Bree asked this. Thanks, Bree. So your town in effect does provide a paid family leave by using short-term disability in this way, because they're paying something in the short-term disability policy that allows them to do that. So I would answer yes.
I'm just going to interrupt here because I want to remind you that we said that this question is for libraries where a local policy provides a level of benefit higher than that available under state statute. That's why it's good to have a partner. So for me, it feels like that is not a level of benefit higher than what is available under state statute. So it probably would be
disability
best.
is shaped by the state. Thank you.
Yes, so I would report it as yes, you have access to short-term disability, and in a spot if you want to. I mean, of course, I feel like with any of these, if you want to, in a, where there's an other or there's a spot to leave a thing, you want to leave a little bit more information, that's fine. But I think reminding us that for a couple of these, we're asking for kind of like above the threshold. So the example of the retirement piece is right. If you're in VMers and you have access to this other thing, that's kind of above. So we want to know. And in this case, you have access to family leave, but it is not above this what the state is providing. So we'd want to just make sure it's reflected in short-term disability.
Yeah, thank you. As I think through that, thanks. Yeah, it's easy. And it keeps it discreet, actually, that it's really not paid family leave. It's really short-term disability, because there will be a cap for that might be distinct from FMLA, depending on how the short-term disability policy is written.
And I feel like that question and the next one from Sue about where town employees have to use up their earned time before getting unpaid leave, these are typical. So in most places I've worked, there's this piece where, if you are going on, if you're not FMLA eligible and you're going on extended leave, you may, with something, this happened during a pregnancy of mine, where you have access to short-term disability. Most places I've worked, I'm not sure I could think of a place that I've worked that doesn't make you use up your earned time before moving on to unpaid time. So these are assumptions that we have that are typical, right? So I think you're really wanting to highlight if this is an unusual, it's unusual for your municipality or your organization.
And then Bridget has a question about FMLA. FMLA, this is a great question, and there are federal rules, and then Vermont has particular state rules for PFL and for paid family leave and FMLA that it's funny, I spent like a morning reading this about Vermont so I could refresh, because every state is a little different. Federal is really the floor, not the ceiling. And Vermont has slightly different. I can't tell you off the top of my head because I did not memorize them. To me, it's kind of typical that Vermont would have a higher level of standard to which it holds employers for treating people when it comes to paid family leave and FMLA. But we're asking, and certainly you're right, Bridget, like it only applies to employers of a certain size. Some of that is untested in municipalities. For example, if you are treated as a quasi-municipal department, depending on the size of municipality, your library could have 5 people, but technically if the total of the town, Shelburne was an example of this for me, has more than 50 employees, you're really a town employee in the end. They're cutting you the check, they're handling VMers, et cetera, even though there's a governing board for the library. But here for us, what we're really getting at is we can look at the state and federal guidelines for paid family leave. What we want to know is whether, this is question 5, whether the employer, whether the library is the employer, is paying or doing something above and beyond that. So is basically opting in to provide something that's paid, because FMLA is unpaid. So it gives you unpaid family leave. These kinds of leaves give you typically give you, in a nutshell, a right to come back to a job at the rate you were making before, with kind of the standard rights and responsibilities. But you are that's the guarantee, kind of like the position will be held for you and you can come back. It's not that you will necessarily get paid. If only we had that safety net for people. We just don't. So it tells you a little bit where my perspective is. So yeah, Maria says, so the percentage that the employer provides. Yes, it's, if we're going back, Maria, I think you're following up on for the 401k, how much does the employer provide? Not the employee, the employer. So if you're paying 80%, it's 80%, and then we can back out what employees pay by doing the reverse math from a percentage of 100. Oddly, my municipality is enrolled in VSERS. I would say Amy asked, I'm going to have to look at VSERS, Amy, because it sounds a lot like VMers. I would, if you could, this is one I did not anticipate because I didn't come across this retirement system in my reading. I would say, can you check off VMers and put in other? It's not VMers, it's VSERS, because it's probably the best way for you to answer that question. And then Stephanie and I will be the people that go back and read about VSERS and talk to folks at the state library just to get a sense of how these systems are distinct. But if it's a state system, we know that we can get the data on what that plan looks like for employees and what the percentages of contributions and eligibility requirements are. So I don't want you to get tasked with having to do that work. You have enough other stuff. We tried with these questions to reduce the amount you had to do on your own legwork. If somebody had asked me what we were contributing to VMers for employees, I would be reading the VMers site. So instead of asking 185 libraries to do this, we're going to do that for you. So based on what boxes people check.
We have a question that didn't come up when we were discussing too. Is there anything to capture health insurance opt-out payments? How do you think we want to handle that in the scope of the survey?
The very last question, I'm like, oh, I think I know right away. The very last question is, and I'll scroll back, other paid benefits or stipend.
Great.
And I would put it under there, under other, because it's absolutely a benefit to opt out of health insurance. It's taxable income. So yeah, I would definitely put it there. I didn't think adding that to that.
Yeah, it feels like an important distinction then for people to keep in mind here, right, is whether the benefit is pre or post tax. So even if you as the employee are paying 100% of it, so the example about, oh, I have access to a 403B, right, or a 401k in addition to VMers, but that it's all what I put in, I'm not getting a match, right, because that's pre-tax, it's a benefit. I would not have access to it otherwise. But that's something like, AFLAC, or if there's like additional life insurance or anything like that that's coming out post-tax. So it could be coming out of my paycheck, but it's post-tax and it's all on me. We're not viewing that in this context as a benefit because of the post-tax. Does that feel like that's a good delineator to use?
It does to me. It does to me.
Okay.
Yeah. Because you're really, in those situations, the employees are really responsible for managing those policies directly and negotiating those policies. You opt into, unpaid photocopying. Sorry, I just saw the chat. That's a great other benefit. Yes. For anybody, I got distracted. I read the chat and Amy says, unpaid photocopying, and winked. Yeah, definitely. I would have considered that a benefit for years of my life working in a library, especially in color. So, but yeah, those are, it's an ease of access for the employee to get to AFLAC or life insurance, but it's not a benefit. You're really just buying it and automatically paying it. And I think some of these things caught on differently before people paid so many things online and just set up auto pay. It got you out of having to write a check and track those payments years ago. I'm 49. Like, I remember all, pre having like Zelle and all of this stuff set up in our lives. I would just like to, I'm looking at the chat, and I just see a conversation between Amy and Stephanie, and I just want to concur that do the best you can with the averages. We're just trying to get a sense of what it looks like for any of these questions. So if you have people who are like all kind of in the middle somewhere, then yeah, take the average. That's great. Or the thing that's most common. It's when you have these outliers where you might say, wow, this new person pays for everything, but everybody else who's been here for a while really doesn't pay for everything. Then you might approach it a little bit differently. And so there's that. And so free beverages and snacks. Oh yeah, people have definitely scrolled down and they can see like what are the other benefits. So I think we've covered short-term disability. Long-term disability is the same thing. It's just long-term disability, as we talked about with short-term disability. The same usual pattern with full and part-time. I think you all get that by now. And then we have this question 8, employer paid unemployment insurance. Does the library or its municipality pay into Vermont's unemployment trust fund? This is going to be a yes for just about everyone. If you don't know, you don't know. But we're still asking the question. Once we know that your library, your municipality participates in the unemployment trust fund, it means that we understand what level of benefit they're getting, because all of that information about how that works is on the Department of Labor website. So we can, in our report to the working group, talk about what that means for libraries based on the number that tap into a potential unemployment benefit for its employees. And then other paid benefits and stipends, yeah, free photocopying, free beverages and snacks. I think Stephanie wrote in the guide, like, not the Christmas cookies that people bring in. So, or the occasional like library staff appreciation day. Do you have like ongoing access to? I've worked in places where people didn't make a ton of money, and we made sure that people who worked in our library had granola bars, and this was just this level of kind of snacking that could serve as a lunch for someone. It makes me kind of sad to think about this, but it is a reality of where people are at in terms of making their budgets, personal budgets work. We would provide kind of just enough where somebody, apples and bananas, you could kind of have a light lunch based on what was in the snack closet, and you could really do that every day if you chose to do that, or bring a little something knowing that there was always a treat or something to supplement it at work. If you're just offering coffee and water, that's not really beverages and snacks. It's kind of basic.
We do highlight a couple of those things. Yeah, we highlight tuition remission. So that really means that staff can have their own personal tuition for higher education or personal certifications. And that's for job related things paid or reimbursed. We talked about the difference between access to technology for personal use and the technology stipend. So looking at those two definitions. And then we, as Judah pointed out, free beverages and snacks. It's consistency is the important here. So it's like, it's not, oh, somebody baked and brought it in. It's not holidays. It's not, staff birthdays. It's not the water cooler or the coffee. So it's if you have more than that, we're going to pay attention to who checks it, and then we'll be there to visit. No, I'm just kidding. But so it's about that consistency.
Yeah. Professional development, Dina asked. I would put that under, hang on, there's something about financial support.
So I think,
conference, workshop
Mm-hmm.
attendance. That's where I'd put professional development. You could check that box because that's really what we're implying there.
Yeah, that somebody's helping to pay for your registration or helping to pay for your travel.
Yep. Yeah, some combination thereof. They're defraying the cost. It may not cover the whole cost, but you're getting something. Professional organization membership. I feel like that's a box we should have put on the survey, but now it's live. So you could put that under other for other paid benefits and say membership to VLA, NELA, etc. Totally get it. Because yeah, I've worked in libraries that pay for that, and that's a great benefit. It can be expensive. Yep.
And I think the key for all of these two, as you brought up, is kind of that consistency piece, right? So again, we're not looking for these outliers, so I'm the library director, I negotiated this works for me, right? But it might have to be renegotiated, or it wouldn't be available if it wasn't me in the position. Those are the things I wouldn't check off on here. But if kind of it's a line in your budget, right, to pay for the library directors or multiple staff, professional organization memberships, then that feels like something that we would want to capture here, because that will persist beyond the individual. So I feel like, Judah, what I'm hearing you saying is always thinking about what is that persistent type of piece, right? So regardless of the individual in it, the position, this would be offered, this level of access to vacation, right? Or this, level of coverage for benefits, or any of these kind of other paid benefits or stipends, that they wouldn't go away completely if it was somebody different in the position.
Yeah. Yeah, I worked under a director who got 8 weeks of vacation in Vermont, and I was like, oh yeah, that person's been there 30 years. That's totally an outlier. The new director is not getting 8 weeks of vacation. It's just how it worked. And so what would it look like? What would the personnel policy look like for the new director coming in? Maybe 3 or 4, right? Something like that.
So I want to,
yes,
we want to leave
plenty. I'm going to say, Jennifer, I see that when I started to go over this for this webinar, I see that number 1 page or shelver, there's a typo in the PDF and I'm kicking myself. So if you can please answer it as page or shelver, I actually need to go into the PDF, change that, because the follow-up questions say library assistant. So it's totally like a cut and paste bad where I didn't capture it, and change it and just replace. So if we could treat that as library page and shelver, in the time being, I know that what I saw first thing today, like kind of thing you see when you're presenting, right? I was like, oh, I missed that, like page 1. So I'll fix that. I'll send it over to the folks at Department of Libraries, and they will replace the PDF that's sitting on the website that may also have that typo or that little error. Thanks for catching it, and I'm so sorry, everybody.
That's why that's really great to do this at the beginning, right? Because there are a lot of eyes, and it's always nice to have a whole nother set.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure to leave time for questions. So let me just run through some of the rest of the things that we have really focused on additional resources for you. So as we mentioned, and as you know, this webinar is being recorded, so you can come back and visit it. It can be shared. Your colleagues can look at it later. And we've mentioned this a couple of times, and the link was put in the chat. But there is a website that is just dedicated to the staff survey, and it has links to help guides. And so we have some frequently asked questions and a detailed guide to the questions in section B and C. And so there are some great things that popped up here too. And there's also a link to that PDF and I believe Word document, a version of the survey. And as I mentioned, you can reach Judah or myself, just Stephanie or Judah at constructivedisruption.info. So if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us, because we want to make sure that you feel like you're really being able to accurately, reflect the the situation, what's happening in your library. But before we get to questions, we just had some tips for how to work through the survey efficiently, say. And so what we would suggest is that you first just kind of set aside 30 minutes to get the lay of the land, right? So print out a copy of the survey or open it. The PDF, when you download it, should be fillable. So you can type into that and save the document itself. So when I'm going to list print out a copy here, but no, if that's your preference, it should be available to you if you download the PDF. And where we suggest is you first go through the survey and you highlight the questions you know you don't have the answers to. These are the things that you know you're going to have to ask somebody else about, right? That may be if you're at a large library, another staff person, maybe you have someone who does HR. If you're at a small library, that might be a trustee, your board chair or a treasurer, or it might be your town treasurer or your town clerk. So just highlight the questions where you think, oh, I don't have this information. And if you make that list of who those sources are, that will help get the ball rolling for you. And then we suggest, so you have some early wins, right? Because it's easy, is to complete section A. Write those answers right down on the print copy or in the form. So we think if you take about 30 minutes to do that, who do I need to ask help for and for what? And to get some of the easier questions out of the way. Then we suggest that you find another kind of 30 minutes or so to do that reach out. So to take the list of the information that you need to collect from someone else and just start to make those calls or send those emails. So you could start by letting them know that you're taking part in this statewide survey of public library staffing and compensation. You can let them know it is through the working group or sponsored by the Vermont Department of Libraries, and share the specific information you're looking for. And then we really suggest that you give them a deadline that you need it back by. So you want to make sure that you leave yourself plenty of time to fill out the survey. And an important part of that is leaving enough time for the people that you have to ask for other information for to get that back to you as well. So we suggest, if you are breaking this up into chunks, take that next chunk to just get the ball rolling on who you need to find other information for and start those asks, start those requests. It might be simple if you call, right? You might want to have a little bit of extra time because if you pick up the phone and call your town clerk, they might be able to answer some of the questions for you quickly. But to just think about setting aside time for that reach out. Then we suggest while you're waiting for that information to come back, right? So you've let people know that you are looking for things. Then we suggest to come back to the survey and look at those questions in section B and section C you feel that you can find the answers to. So some of these you'll know from preparing your budget each year, or you'll know because you can ask your two other colleagues how many years they've been here, or whatever it might be. So we suggest looking at those questions and writing the answer down on your print survey. And we really suggest starting with section B, which again has the detail about the different positions, because then if you need to go back to your external source, if you have someone else that you're needing to find information from, you have a little bit more information about your staffing. So if they ask you some detailed questions or they need some follow-up, you might be able to say, oh, I'm looking for this part-time and this full-time, or whatever it might be. And we suggest that you give yourself about an hour to do that part. So we're at about 2 hours at minimum for filling out the survey right now, we suggest. So again, we know that this is an investment of time, and we want to give you as much time as possible to do it, and breaking it up into pieces is going to be really helpful. And so then with the last piece, we say you probably want, even if you have everything absolutely filled out, when you bring it all together, you probably want to set aside at least another 30 minutes to enter the data into the survey, to review it, to make sure that you've entered it correctly, and then finally submit, right? So as you hear back answers to your questions, just write them down on the print survey, right? Again, we would really encourage you to start this as soon as possible. So get the link, open it up, print out the print version, even if you have to fix question 1, about library shelvers, so that you could just start collecting the information that you need. And so again, with your submitted survey, if after you fill it in and you realize, oh, you forgot something, something wasn't quite right, just please let us know if you see a mistake. You'll again get a copy of what you submitted, and so you'll be able to see if you have made a mistake, and you can just let us know. But so we are really suggesting that you kind of put aside at least 3 hours or so to fill out the survey. That, of course, does not have to be all at once. And again, as we suggest that it not be all at once, that you break it into a few rounds, especially because for many of us, we'll have to seek other information, seek some support for some other information in order to fill out the questions accurately. And so with that, we've answered some questions throughout, but we, again, wanted to leave plenty of time for other questions. So I'll stop sharing my screen in a minute. And we'd love to know if there are any other questions that you have about the survey. You can feel free to put them in the chat as you have been, or go ahead and put them, unmute yourself and ask a question, or raise your hand and then we can unmute yourself in case there's a rush.
Well, Melissa asked a question, how will the aggregated data be shared with the Vermont library community and when? So great question, because there's a lot of time going into this. The survey will be open until, Stephanie, correct me if I get the dates wrong, I think August 14th. We are monitoring throughout now and August 14th when and how many people have completed the survey. So we really get to that 80% or above threshold. So we have great statewide representation. Hopefully we're there by August 14th. And then kind of that week, we might have some loose ends to tie up with people if we really kind of need to drum up a few more responses and really encourage people to get their data in. And we will then take about 3 weeks to analyze the data and to look at the trends and the patterns and package that into an analytic report that will, in draft form, go to Kathy Del Neo as the as the chair of the working group, and then we will review that together. And about mid to late September, we will present the analytic report to the working group. So that's when you could expect to see a finished report that represents the aggregation and the analysis and I would say benchmarking to some degree or another of this data, although I cautiously use the word benchmark, and we might end up looking at bands of compensation to get a sense of what the patterns are, because benchmark can imply something that's aspirational. And if we see, for example, that half of library workers in Vermont are paid under a living wage, that's certainly not a benchmark, that's aspirational. And that would be the kind of commentary that we would include in a report. These are the trends and the patterns we're looking at. So I would say by the end of September, you will, I don't know when the working group will make that analytic report part of their website, but that's kind of the timeline for when that document will be prepared and ready to be appended to the larger report that the working group is putting together. This is one component of it. Glad you asked. Thanks.
Yeah, and Bree asked a question. Vermont is expensive no matter where you live, but there are certain counties that might be more expensive or have higher compensations. Are these numbers going to be searchable or comparable by county or region or by service population? And I think you answered that in this question of kind of bands. You know, certainly when and this is, I think, again, where our background in libraries in Vermont is, I think, really helpful to the project as a whole, is because we're not going to seek to kind of aggregate this together to come out with one message, right? If we see these clear bands, as Judah said, right, that's what we're going to be pointing out, right? And if we see, you know, these kind of, you know, this grouping right by area or county or service population, those things are going to be really important to highlight, in our opinion. So for us, I think we would say it's more important to say, if this were to be true, for example, that, you know, libraries that are solo staffed, right, tend to be this percentage less compensated than, you know, their equivalent colleagues in other situations. That would be important to report out to the working group, as opposed to kind of saying, oh, let's average all of that together to say what's the average pay for a library director. We'd want to highlight that there are those real discrepancies.
Yeah. Stephanie, as you talk about that, I think, yeah, of course, we kind of all know a quarter of the population lives in Chittenden County. It's kind of its own environment that's distinct from so many other parts of the state, as an example. And we might expect compensation and library staffing with that concentration of a population compared to the rest of the state to look a little bit different. In fact, I would be surprised if it didn't look different. And so this is the kind of thing that we'll look at. To answer Bree's question, will it be searchable or comparable by county or region? We will have a narrative report, but we won't have a database for the data. So that's not a product that's coming out of this project. So there, we're looking at the patterns and we're sharing those patterns with everyone. The state will get the raw data stripped of any identifiers of what library the data belongs to, and the state will make a decision about how that's made accessible. So you would have things like county, something where you can't really drill down and say, okay, this is library X, but we have a sense. So we have to work out what that raw data looks like and how we package that. There are some federal laws that we have to comply with, that the state has to comply with, in terms of collecting salary information at this level for a state agency, so that, and that federal regulation is designed to protect workers, so that when there are compensation negotiations at a state or a local level, this reference point is not a tool only available to the employer and not the employee. So it's really, it constrains how we can package and share some of that raw data.
And I think we'll be looking to kind of give, again, that narrative is to give kind of that extra layer. I mean, in this case, some of these comparable, at least comparables, right, or these comparisons, thank you, you can already do within the data that's collected as part of your state report. And so I think we're really looking, that's where that narrative piece is going to come in more handy. You could search, your state report data now, right, at a high aggregate level by county. So then we're just really looking at, how do we highlight discrepancies that might be by classification, right? Things like this, a level deeper than we're really looking at in the state report, at the same time keeping that confidential, as Judah mentioned.
Melissa asked, what do we expect the state legislature to do with this data? I'm not sure I have the answer to that question. I think that might be a question for someone in the working group, which has had Jeanette.
Popped back on.
Thanks.
Hi.
Great
Yeah,
question. Love it. Like,
I don't know either, Melissa. I think it will all shake out in the end. We don't know what the legislature is going to do with this, but we know that just getting it out on paper is going to be extremely important, and just letting folks know what the situation is. So, yeah, and maybe direct. They did not. I have to go look again. Did they ask for it, was the question. I have to go and look again and see if they specifically mentioned salaries. Staffing, they did mention for sure. There were several bullets, and I'll post the charge from the legislature back into the chat again so you can kind of review it. But it's important anyway, and this has been something that has been on folks' mind throughout the state anyway, and they just need to know what the situation is.
Yeah, and I think that what we understand about the report that the working group putting together, again, this is one part of it. It's meant to be, right, this overview, this big picture look at kind of the status of libraries in Vermont. So, right, the staffing and the compensation, right, is an important part of that. Of just helping paint a really clear and accurate picture of what Vermont libraries are working with, right, and facing.
Absolutely.
And Tom McMurdo, no, Josh Muse just posted the charge in there with regard to staff, so I'm going to put it in the chat. That's a quote.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Who has other questions? Thanks.
So they did ask whether compensation and benefits are sufficient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so this will answer sufficiency is a slippery word, which is why in analysis, when we write this up, we're thinking of looking at things like, I remember when I lived in Vermont years ago, I haven't reread the work of, we were one of the early states looking at, okay, what's minimum wage, but what's actual cost of living? And Vermont was so far ahead of other places, I think, in the country in terms of that conversation. We didn't have many, many peers at the statewide level talking about, as Bree mentioned, like, it's so expensive everywhere in the state, and are the wages enough? So even to be able to say, this percentage of people in Vermont have access to health benefits through work of who work in libraries, we just don't have those numbers now. So we think about compensation and benefits and how people are taken care of as part of the labor they give to their library and their community. This will provide everyone a way to look at that.
Well, I bet people might just be eager to get started, right?
That's right. That's right.
But so certainly, as you have more questions, again, know that Judah and I are here to answer those questions for you. You'll be hearing from us. So we'll be following up, doing some follow-up and support, again, because I want to take us back to the beginning when we really talked about how important it is for this data to be statistically significant. So, again, when we're looking at reporting back to the legislature on this charge, really helping the working group have the information that they need, it is so important to really get a large return, a large result on people taking this survey. And so we know that this is a big undertaking we're asking for. We know it is a commitment of time. We know it does require you to dig for some information, but we hope that you can also see that the overall result will be worth it, will be a tool of support for libraries in the state, a tool and really information of support to the working group for their overall charge. So we want to thank you ahead, and again, know that we're here over the next month to provide support to you and to ask questions. We encourage you to check into those resources that we've provided for you if you have other questions, and again, to know that you can reach out back to us if you have some specific questions as well. So if I were to leave you with 2 action steps, or maybe I'll say 3. One would be to look for that email, and maybe Jeanette, you can let us know if that is coming, or has it already been released to libraries with the link?
I don't believe it has been released yet.
I think it's today. I think it was planned to release after the webinar. So number 1 action item is to look for that email. Know that it's coming. So if you certainly haven't seen it by Friday, right, then you'll want to make sure that you follow up, because you should have received it. So again, open up that link, print the survey, and set aside time. So whether you want to follow our suggestions for the chunks of time, or you want to find time on your own calendar, set aside the time now and try to do that early. Again, knowing how important it will be to reach out to other colleagues, particularly for some of those benefit questions. And then the 3rd action item I would just suggest is for each of you to reach out to someone who wasn't here. If you're able to look through the participant list, and just say, oh, the colleague at my next nearest library, or someone I always sit with right at the conference, or wasn't here today, I'm going to reach out to them and let them know that this is coming and there is support. That will be really huge.
Thank you. Just to echo one sentiment related to all that, we're stronger as a community, a library community in Vermont, with this data. We really are. So we know where everybody kind of stands and what it really looks like for compensation and benefits and staffing. So not having this is a big gap. Having it's a great asset for the library community, the public library community particularly. So thanks everyone, because we'll create it together. It's going to take everybody.
So thank you both. We will post this video recording on the website as soon as it processes and is available. And thanks for being so thorough. And folks out there, Stephanie and Judah are available to you, as is Kathy, and as are the working group members. So please reach out to the working group folks if you have questions or concerns. And I'm excited to have this opportunity, thanks to the working group, to really see what's going on. So thank you. Have a good day, everybody. Be safe out there. And yeah, talk to you soon.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.